Cyber attacks are no longer an emerging threat. They are a clear and present danger. Relentless, increasingly sophisticated, and global in their reach, these threats impact governments and industry alike. By exploiting vulnerabilities, cyber attacks have the power to undermine defenses, diminish capabilities, and unleash widespread instability, exacting a heavy cost. The functioning of the relationship between the Department of Defense and the defense industrial base relies on both cooperation and a shared commitment to discipline. When it comes to defending against countless and ever-present threats to critical defense data, that entails assessing, monitoring, and hardening of networks and information systems that transit or house that data. Over the past several years, new standards and processes have been established that govern the handling of information, particularly CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. Those standards are regulated by Clause 252.204-7012 of the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, or DFARS. The deadline for compliance was December 31st, 2017. By that time, nearly 90% of all DoD contracts included this clause. The National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-171 establishes 110 separate security requirements defense contractors are obligated to address for 7012 compliance. 800-171A provides assessment guidance for each of those requirements. Comprised of 320 assessment objectives, 171A is used to determine whether the 800-171 requirements have been implemented correctly. DCMA's Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, or DIBCAC, assesses contractor compliance of these mandated regulations. The initial assessment and compliance responsibilities fall to the contractor. For contracts governed by 7012 regulations, DIB contractors must conduct a self-assessment of 800-171 compliance according to 171A assessment guidance based upon the DoD assessment methodology scoring system. That basic assessment score is submitted into SPURS, the Supplier Performance Risk System. This is necessary to remain eligible for DoD contracts with CUI, and the government may use this SPURS score in procurement risk assessment and selection. Though some may be inclined to submit an inaccurately high level of compliance, be assured that false representation comes with serious penalties. Higher assessment scores aren't necessarily better than lower ones. It depends on where the deficiencies are. And these scores aren't set in stone. As a contractor's processes improve, the score can be updated in SPURS. Likewise, if DIBCAC conducts a compliance assessment, the score will be revised accordingly. Either way, an assessment must be conducted and the score updated no less than every 3 years. In addition to the self-assessment, contractors are responsible for drafting a system security plan, documenting their policies and practices that demonstrate proper execution of all 800-171 requirements. Submission of the plan of action and milestones or its expected completion date may also be required. In accordance with DoD priorities, DIBCAC will conduct evidence-based medium and high compliance assessments of contractor systems and processes. In the case of a medium assessment, the assessor will review both contractor compliance of 800-171 requirements and the contractor's SSP. A high assessment takes this a step further and entails both a virtual and on-site evaluation. The contractor should be prepared to provide documentation, diagrams, or other objective evidence that demonstrates proper execution of the 800-171 requirements. Here are just a few important reminders about CUI, as well as some best practices to ensure that security and compliance are maintained. First, CUI isn't just data provided by the government. It can also be generated by the DIB in the course of development or work performed. There are also flow-down requirements in 7012. When handling CUI, a prime is responsible for ensuring that any subs or suppliers in its chain are also compliant and have submitted their own self-assessments. A prime can request the basic assessment scores from its subs and suppliers. Reduce risk by restricting access to CUI at every turn, physically or otherwise. Utilizing an enclave environment has the dual benefit of isolating sensitive information while limiting the scope of the networks and information systems subject to 800.171 compliance. If there's ever uncertainty whether any information being handled constitutes CUI, check with the prime or with the government for guidance. The protection of CUI, as with all sensitive and proprietary information, must be of paramount concern for all who possess it, whether in the DIB or the DoD. The threat and potential for harm posed by cyber attacks is already grave enough without sustaining incidents caused by a failure to comply with existing standards and regulations. Control the flow of information. Know what you're sharing and who you're sharing it with. Be proactive about compliance, certifications, and the requirements of a DIBCAC assessment. Be vigilant and be prepared.